Hello, I'm tiptoeing through a flooded park here in Salisbury. You can tell it's Salisbury because over there is the cathedral. So I'm following a modern route called the Cranborne Droves Way, which should get me most of the way from Salisbury to Shaftesbury. I think it gets to Wyn Green, and then I've got to sort of find my own way from there, the last bit to Shaftesbury. I found out about the Ox Drove from two sources actually, both the Ancient Trackways of Wessex book that I've been reading, Timperley and Brill. The other source that I found was Jack Hargreaves, one of his delightful, charming old programmes. Were they called Old Country? I think they possibly started in the 70s, ran into the early 80s, and he has one of his episodes where he goes along what he calls the King's Way, but he is referring to the Ox Drove in a horse and cart, and even wild camps in the middle. That is the first footpath sign I've seen for the Cranborne Droves Way. That's very reassuring. Joining here the first drove track of the day. This is labelled on the OS map as the old Shaftesbury drove track, so we're not yet on the Ox Drove, but hopefully this will lead us to it, or some of the way to it. According to the OS map, I'm now following the course of a Roman road. Unless I've taken a wrong turn, this is still marked on the OS map here as a Roman road. Really doesn't feel like it now that it's all overgrown. You know, these Romans, they're not particularly good at maintaining their roads, are they? Look at that. That needs clearing. Nice bit of silvery, wintry light glinting through the trees here. Joined a proper road now and heading to the, what I understand to be tiny, tiny village, possibly even hamlet, Stratford Tony. Alas, no pub. Huh. What should I do about this? Right. Oh. That is pretty flooded. I genuinely don't know how to get across here. Can I maybe clamber along that bank at the side? It's going to be a bit thorny, isn't it? And can I jump over there? I don't actually quite think I can make that. This is mildly ridiculous. I managed by sort of clambering along through the slightly thorny bushes there. That was not easy. I think I'm going to rename this place Stratford Tony. I think the best thing is that wasn't even the proper ford. There it is. But who would have thought one of the most challenging bits of, well, I shouldn't jinx it, I haven't done most of the walk yet, but quite possibly one of the most challenging bits of the walk was getting through a village. Wow. Really is very full river there. I have left Stratford Tony behind me. Quite glad to see the back of it. Pretty though it was, challenging place to negotiate on foot. Something's come to a grisly end there, possibly a crow. Looking at that wing. According to the map, I'm actually back on that Roman road again. Don't know if any of those Roman enthusiasts among you, IWC21, think this looks particularly Roman or not. Nice the way the sun's glinting through these beech trees lining the Roman road here. Kind of UFO landed here. They obviously misestimated the size required to conquer the earth. Tumulus over there, marked on the OS map. I think that's the first barrow-like thing I've seen on this walk so far. The landscape is starting to get a bit more interesting. It's been quite agricultural, farmers' field on and off until now. A bit more dips and bumps to look at now. Through a field of some sort of brassicas, are these? Something cabbagey. Happy to admit I'm finding this cabbage field is it's wearing a bit thin now. I feel like I've been walking through it for hours. Crossing over another droving track here. This is called Croucheston Drove. We're heading this way, well, I'm heading this way. Finally through this other unceremonious little gap in the hedge. We're on to the Ox Drove at last. Oh, look at that. Oh, fun. The Ox Drove has greeted us with an impassable puddle. Wonderful. Decided to stay in the field just a tiny bit longer to bypass that puddle back there. Looked a bit ridiculous. Here we are then, Oxdrove track. To the untrained eye, probably looks like any other track, including to my eyes. But this could well be thousands of years old. Oh dear, perhaps that's not an entirely one-off occurrence. I did the Stratflood Tony approach of sort of clambering along the bank at the side and hoping whatever I was holding on to for support wasn't going to break. All very well talking about these ancient tracks being along the tops of the hills so that they could be traversed in winter when it was wet underfoot. The paths and tracks down in the valleys would be washed away or knee deep in mud, but certainly got its fair share of mud here as well. By the way, the sky is reflecting in the puddles here. About an hour from sunset now. Current state of the sun over there. This is marked as hut, lodge and farm on the OS map, and Jack Hargreaves went past on his route along what he called the Kingsway, the Oxdrove. Jack Hargreaves explained in his programme from, was it 1984, that the huts were originally something like service stations along the ancient track. People would come up from the village and sell supplies to travellers at these huts. Oxdrove crosses a road here. Quite nice views to be had from the road there. Going to take a little diversion from the Oxdrove now and head into this bit of woods. On the OS map it looks like there is a long barrow in here, which I'd quite like to take a look at if I can find it. And also I was sort of wondering if this might be a good spot to hunker down for the night. It's a beech wood, so that's sort of a mixed blessing in terms of trying to find camping spots. On the plus side, there's lots of open ground, it's not too dense and overgrown. It's also not particularly stealthy, especially this time of year. You can see quite far and wide, so just sort of hoping this time of day, a weekday in January, there isn't really going to be anyone else around. But looks like this is the long barrow. Of course, like most unexcavated long barrows, it is essentially a lump in the ground. A bit of a ditch possibly off to this side. May have been the spot from which some of the material was removed from the earth to build this mound. Has at least 3 beech trees, aren't they, growing out of the top. Possibly an older one that has been felled at some point. Now there's just a moss covered stump. So if that is indeed a long barrow, and historic England seems to think so, then that's quite possibly a 5,000-year-old lump. Something else has met a grisly end there. Is that possibly deer jawbone? Right, I think this spot is going to have to do. It started raining now and it's getting dark. It's a few minutes after sunset. What time is it? 4:30, in fact, a good quarter of an hour after sunset. Of course it gets dark a bit more quickly in the woods, so I'm going to get my tent set up. So I've got a dry place to sit while the rains. Lights going, isn't it? But tent set up. It's not long gone 5, but I don't really have much else to do, so I might as well get on with cooking tonight's dinner. An Italian classic called pasta e fagioli. It's just pasta with beans, essentially. It's sort of a soupy, stewy kind of pasta dish. I thought it would be kind of warming and hearty. It is January. It's not particularly cold right now, but I'm sure I will start to feel it in an hour or so. So for that I have some borlotti beans, some pasta somewhere, hopefully. 1 small red onion, got a bit of carrot as well. First of all, chop up an onion. Not particularly exciting footage. Little jar of olive oil. Go in there. Goes some chopped onion. Next thing to chop up is a carrot. I peeled it at home just to make life a bit easier. Get the idea. Some chopped carrot. And that goes as well. Normally perhaps put the beans in first, but I'm a bit worried I might be short of cooking space, so I want to make sure I can get all that pasta in. That can go in now. And obviously that's going to need some water for it to actually cook. I'm going to squeeze a load of tomato puree in. Doesn't sound particularly appetizing, but I think that can of beans will go in there. There's a bit of extra liquid in there. Very gloopy liquid. It just fits. The other thing's one of these tomato stock cubes, perhaps about, I don't know, half of that or just slightly less. It is quite salty. We get today's wine. Oh, you can't see the is that visible? I don't know. This is a producer called Taupe Not Merm. It's a 2018. I think it's just their village level Gevrey Chambertin. I'm just going to say the same things I always say, aren't I? Cherry, a bit floral, blah blah blah. Cherry, a bit floral. Yes, I like it. Fresh, fruity, bit dainty, pretty nice. Bubbling away, probably burning on the bottom. Grate a bit of cheese. Have the comically small cheese grater. I think I've brought this out before. This is so pathetically slow. Well, it sort of works, you get the idea. So I think the pasta is actually pretty much cooked. I think that's probably done enough, so final touch. Garnished with parmesan. Here is the finished dish. Very rich, substantial pasta e fagioli. That's obvious, but you'd have to like beans to enjoy this. And possibly if I were making this at home, I would use a little bit more water, but I just couldn't really fit much more in the pan here. So overall, pretty happy with that. It is really dark. If I turn the camera off, you can't really see very much at all. Occasionally a sort of bit of mist rolls through the woods and it's particularly sort of gloomy and atmospheric. Managed to get at least one, not great, but sort of half okay night photo with my phone. Perhaps I'll put that on the screen. It's not amazing, but you get a rough idea of there are some silhouettes of trees, and beyond that some stars are just about visible. I'm reminded what does one do at this time of year for this number of hours to drink some wine and just stare into the gloom. I think I have actually crawled inside the tent. It's only 8 o'clock. It wasn't so much that it was cold, but it's been kind of raining on and off. Nice and warm and dry inside here. It's just a little bit boring. As I say, it is kind of a challenge wild camping this time of year. I don't mind the cold, but the daylight hours really kind of problematic. So. Can you hear the deer barking? That's loud. Good morning, if that's not an exaggeration. It's not quite 6 AM yet, still a good 2 hours until sunrise. I think I feel like I've had enough now of this wild camping lark for one day. That was home for the night. Looks a bit of a mess, doesn't it? Condensation has been quite bad this time. It's very damp generally around, and there was rain during the night, and the deer barking keeping me awake, and the deer doing some sort of forestry operations a few meters away from my tent a bit earlier, so difficult to get much sleep. That's the extent of the condensation / general dampness. There's practically a puddle forming in the bottom of the tent here. I feel like I ought to take a shot of the tent before I pack it up. Pretty much all packed up there. Just going to have my very rudimentary breakfast. A couple of slices of Gale's bread. As ever, hashtag leave no trace. I'm exiting the woods. Short section along the road here. Back on the Ox Drove now, although I think the road actually made for easier walking, particularly in this lighting. Challenging to deal with an uneven track in the dark, albeit I do have a head torch. Oh no, is that a massive puddle ahead? Yep, massive puddle with of course the whatever the shrubbery is along the edges is thorny as well. Okay, change of plan. I noticed the field next to the track there is open access land, so I'm going to walk along the track, but not on the track, if that makes sense, by the side of it, and see if I can find a place to hop back over the fence here. That looks like a good candidate to me. It's back on the Ox Drove. I hope this isn't another case of walking along for 10 metres and finding another impassable lake. We're starting to get lovely glimpses of pinky orangey sky. Oh dear, another one of those. Sort of managing by inching along this bank at the left. Boy. And another one just a few metres on. At least this one's got some sort of a path alternative up on the bank. Nice silhouette of those thorny trees. Oh dear, never ends, does it? I wonder if this one's just about tiptoeable. There really is no reprieve in these things. Some rustic ephemera to give a pastoral tone to the foreground of that shot. Here's a plainer version without the rustic ephemera. Which do you prefer? Answers in the comments. Progress. Can't walk and talk with all this mud. Progress. Not facing the camera at least. Progress. Try and get to the second word of that sentence. Progress has been incredibly slow this morning. I have been walking over an hour now, I think, since I left camp, and my phone tells me I have accomplished 1.8 miles. Not great, is it? Deer tracks, possibly? Or... Mud, mud, glorious mud. Nothing quite like it for slowing your progress to Shaftesbury. Mud, mud, more mud. I'm going slightly mud. Mud. I know, said Tweedy. I'll walk along an ancient ridgeway and I'll talk about how it made routes passable even in winter, when the valleys down below were covered in mud and flooded. People would walk high up on the hills and keep their feet dry. I don't quite understand this sign. It says byway to Ox Drove. Surely that is the Ox Drove. Anyway, I'm delighted to report I'm on a tarmac road for a bit now. I'm going to practically skip along here. You can still see the moon over there. I don't know if that's going to come out. Birds flying overhead. Flock of sheep grazing. How bucolic. I think this is probably the official moment of sunrise now. It's 8:11. Possibly a slightly better view there. Bit of a 360 view now, this stretch of the road. Some pinkish clouds over there too. Check on the sunrise. Nice. So I'm now back on a muddy track again, but I'm hoping this section, given the sort of lay of the land, it's a little bit higher up, doesn't have such sort of deep, tall hedges and all of that. So hoping this is going to be a little bit easier going. Really wide here. It's like a dual carriageway of ancient tracks. Feeling a bit of back pain. I think probably, as always, when I try wild camping, I didn't sleep particularly well. Nice views off to the side of the track here, across these downs. Weird bit of fly tipping. Is that a car seat? Looks like nature has tried to reclaim it as well. I think I'm onto the final straight of the Ox Drove now. We've just left that road, and then there's a chalky track going on from here. Very narrow ridge heading over across to that.
Good boy.
Wingreen, 277 metres high, and that makes it the highest point in the Cranborne Chase area. I don't think I've even mentioned Cranborne Chase yet in this video, but that is the area of Wiltshire heading into Dorset that I have been walking across. Couldn't find much about it on the web in the very cursory search I did just now. It has this clump of beech trees at the top in a ring, and it's slightly reminiscent of Chanctonbury Ring, I suppose, in that regard. I don't know if these are anything particularly ancient. There do look to be some very basic earthworks here, some sort of slight elevation there and a bit of a possible ditch around the outside, but I don't know if that's just naturally occurring. The beech trees are almost certainly deliberately planted here, but whether or not that's an ancient thing or a relatively modern thing, I'm not sure. Wikipedia tells me that from here on a clear day you can see the Isle of Wight and Bournemouth and places like that, but I don't think today constitutes a particularly clear day. Let's go and tap the trig point. I haven't seen a lot of these on today's and yesterday's walk. My first trig point of the outing. So from here I'm actually going to be following a section of the Wessex Ridgeway, which is nice for me because I have sort of walked the whole thing start to finish, but me being me, I made lots of strategic shortcuts along the road, and this section I'm going to be walking today, at least some of it, I think is a bit that I cut off. That's confusing. I thought the Cranborne Droves Way finished here at Wingreen. Maybe it finishes at the car park. But anyway, there is also a Wessex Ridgeway sign. Nice, back on the Wessex Ridgeway. Into the woods now on the Wessex Ridgeway, and I think this is a section I actually did walk. It was just back there I followed the road for a bit to cut off a corner. Signs seen better days, and look at that. Full of snail shells, that's weird. I remember this bit from the previous time I was walking along the Wessex Ridgeway. Down here are some watercress beds. There you go, watercress. This is the village of Lwell. I stopped off at that pub when I was walking the Wessex Ridgeway for lunch. I think crossing this road here was the only point on the entire Wessex Ridgeway route, which is 160 miles, that I walked past somebody else who was obviously also doing the whole Wessex Ridgeway. The only time I actually saw somebody, you know, with a backpack with a clear intention. I had said a quick hi, and he confirmed that yes, he was indeed planning to walk the whole Wessex Ridgeway. So it's a really undertrodden route, the Wessex Ridgeway. I was doing it in summer that time as well, you know, would have thought it would be peak season. I've left the Wessex Ridgeway now, and for the final bit of my walk I will be following the Hardy Way to Shaftesbury. Nice bit of thatch over there. It's pretty. Very grand looking. It's definitely dragging a bit now. We'd just like to get to Shaftesbury, have a nice long sit down, something to eat. Feet are starting to hurt now, as well as the back. I can see the first houses of Shaftesbury just over there, but there's got to be one last mud bath, hasn't there, for old time's sake. Can you say hello and welcome to a Tweedy Outdoors video? It's impressive how they still keep up with those even in the town. Welcome to Shaftesbury. Right, I have made it to Shaftesbury. Originally thought I was going to visit the famous Gold Hill, popularised by those Hovis adverts, but it's raining now. My feet hurt, my back hurt, and I think I just want to get the bus and get back home, have a nice sit down. So we'll have to make do instead for the tourist information photo of Gold Hill, which will look much nicer than it would if I schlepped up there today on foot. I've been walking for 6 hours solid. I'm a bit worn out, but I hope some of that was interesting. Not really very accessible in January, so perhaps better if you were thinking of walking along the Ox Drove. Wait until summer, I would say. Might be a bit more pleasant all round. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.